Opal Anchel is a certified parenting coach and operates her own practice called Purposeful Parenting. Her work is based on brain and nervous system development during childhood and adolescence, emotional intelligence, and attachment science. You can connect with her at purposefulparentingbyopal.com. Thank you so much, Opal, for your time.
Glad to be here. And it's Purposeful Parenting with Opal.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
Purposefulparentingwithopal.com.
Totally great.
So first, I would like to ask you about the
Mhm.
parent-child relationship, which is just such a big topic that comes up over and over in my work, and I know in your work as well. So how do you see modern screen technology affecting that parent-child relationship in your coaching practice?
I would say screens are the number one topic issue that keeps coming up in my work with parents regarding disconnect and communication and conflicts with their children. And interestingly enough, it's one of my favorite things to work about with parents because it's here to stay, not the conflicts, the screens and the children. And there is a way to process things a little differently, um, proper boundaries to be set around it. But it's very interesting how often we as parents set ourselves up for conflict as soon as we approach our child when they're holding a screen.
Mhm.
And a lot of it has to do with our own personal triggers. And I work with parents to try to understand their relationship to screens because children are co-regulating creatures. They have mirror neurons. Since they're toddlers, when they fall and they look to us to see how they should react and feel, their energy is very much connected to ours. And often when parents see a child on a screen, a lot of subconscious things are coming up for the parent, such as dread of the conflict of trying to get the child off the screen,
Yeah.
guilt about having the kid on the screen. Often it is about fear of what this means, what this child may be exposed to because of the screens. So all these things come up for us subconsciously, and as we approach the child, we already have a triggered nervous system, which the child's energy taps into immediately, and we're already setting up on the right path for conflict before we even started the communication.
That is so true. And just to back up for a second, because we both identified that this is something that most parents are worried about. According to the latest Pew poll, it's two-thirds of parents think that parenting is harder than it was 20 years ago. And they list technology and smartphones and social media as the main reason. So I think you're so right on that when you're going into the situation, you're already, going into it with these kind of more negative emotions, right? And uh,
Mm-hmm.
that can set you up for maybe not the best outcome, right? When you're,
Absolutely, especially when you're coming in seeking some sort of a connection or some sort of cooperation, but your nervous system is already triggered. And naturally, especially if you're dealing with adolescents, their nervous system is very sensitive to begin with.
yeah,
So it's just setting up for a nice fuse to get lit up.
yeah. Interesting. So let's talk about attachment, which, as we talked about, is a big part of your work as well. So, how do you think modern screen technology has an impact on forming secure attachment and how? And maybe quickly for the parents that don't know exactly what that means, maybe identify what that means as well.
Okay, so, secure attachment, and the biggest thing about secure attachment is when the human, the child, feels truly seen, heard, felt, soothed. And often with the screens, it ends up affecting both parties, whether it is the parent that is somewhat distracted or is dealing with their work or social or news via phone and therefore is not fully emotionally available to connect with the child, or whether it is the child that is going through something and therefore they're not fully available to connect. The minute that disconnect occurs, secure attachment is faltering because we're not having the fully seen, fully felt, fully heard. Often there's some lack of compassion around screen with adolescents and what they're going through. And when they're going through that, um, the my parents don't get me.
Yeah.
Sorry, my screen keeps messing around with us. My parents don't get me is again just something that fosters the disconnect of I'm not really being seen, I'm not really being heard for the child. And the same thing for the parent that is not feeling like they're being heard or their needs are being seen by their child.
hmm I've had another, this is a topic that comes up a lot, and I've had a few other experts call it like a third party in the room, right? Do you
Mm-hmm.
resonate with that as well?
There is, and what I find, and this is so interesting, that the minute the phone is there or the screen is there, for adults it's mostly the phone, but the screen, we're already making a very subliminal message that the two parties that are sitting across from each other are not all that matters.
Yeah.
There's one other thing that, by virtue of just being on the table next to us, has a presence.
hmm
And that is not only energetically sending that message, but also we do. It dings, we pick it up, we take a peek right there,
Yeah.
and then we're communicating that I'm not 100% available for
Yeah.
this moment, for this connection.
Yeah, there's so many subliminal things, and this is another topic we've talked to with so many experts. Even like walking into the room with the phone in your hand kind of
Mm-hmm.
signifies uh, that you could be distracted. We talk a lot about, if you are going to be face to face with somebody and your phone is present, just put it face down. Like these things do really matter, that physical separation, because studies do show that just the presence of the phone is distracting. So
Absolutely.
those could be some good tips for parents as well. Like try to physically separate from it. And there are, I don't want to say sadly, but this is just where we are now. There are products that let you do this, that you can literally put your phone in or disable your phone, to give you that self binding strategy so that we can not get in the way of human connection. Like this is just such a widespread issue amongst most families, especially those that have maybe multiple teenagers or something like that in house. In the house, it's a really, really real challenge that people are facing. So there are strategies there, but physical separation makes a big difference for sure for connection.
It it is, and making a statement around it. Absolutely, like narrating it,
Yeah.
communicating. I am going to put this away so it does not distract
Yeah.
me. Starting that sort of statement around your child from a very early stage,
Yeah.
I think is a great way for them to see modeling, but also to understand the process behind it, that it is a purposeful choice. It's not easy, but this is what we choose to do in order to give this moment, this element, 100% of our presence.
Yeah, and modeling works into the teens as well. Like you might not think that they're watching you or care what you're doing, but they're not going to let you know that, but they do. They are watching and it does matter. Like even at that age, and it's a sign of respect as well as the adult to kind of give the kid the respect of saying, "Hey, I'm just going to check something and put it down or I'm going to consciously put it down." Now you're also modeling good screen habits as well for when they're adults. Like even adults have a hard time still with good screen etiquette. So this is
Oh,
something
yes.
that has to be taught to teenagers. I think what happens is a lot of times we hand kids these devices and just expect that they're going to know what to do first of all, and that they're going to know how to have good etiquette. But you have to teach it, and modeling it is obviously the best way to do it. So that's a really, really great tip. So let's talk about downtime. I know that's something that you speak a lot as well about in your work. So why is it important for kids to be bored or have that downtime?
Well, throughout the entire day, their brain just collects data. And they have to have a moment where there's no new input in order for the brain to actually start filtering, processing um, everything that they have been exposed to, things that they saw, communications they had with friends, feelings they had about the communications with the friends. In order for us to have that opening for conversations and for guidance to help them through their day-to-day experiences, their brain has to have a moment to actually process how they felt about the experiences that they have gone through or were just exposed to, But often what happens, there's just data coming at them all day long. And with a lot of people, is all the way through bedtime, which is something that I work very hard against with my clients.
Yeah.
And the brain never has that opportunity. And therefore, the parents don't have that opportunity to even sense that plight within their children and get that opening to go in and probably help the child work through
Yeah.
something that they experienced or saw.
Yeah, that's so true. When you're constantly being stimulated, you might not get a chance to even notice, like you said, those emotional opportunities for connection. I'll add to that as well. When people might not know this, but when your brain is bored, it's actually not dormant. It activates a different part of your brain where creativity happens, where problem solving happens. That's why we have the term eureka moment. I mean, these moments come from downtime. So, I mean, it's important for connection and emotional regulation and all the things you're talking about. But it's also important if you want your kid to be, a strategic deep thinker, right? Like they're going to need that time to come up with those great ideas as a kid, which is it's so important for the confidence as well. So it might feel painful, but there are, uh, preaching the choir, I know, but there are so many benefits to letting them do it, letting them feel it. So,
And it
um,
does feel painful. So it's great for parents to uh, gain the appreciation for some compassion that is needed around that time. Yes, we've all gone through moodiness, specifically in adolescence, a lot of moodiness, a lot of temperament changes. But the lows of this generation are actually chemically and scientifically lower.
mhm,
So a little more compassion is needed from the parents to understand screens are a part of their lives and it is affecting them
yeah.
chemically and their dopamine levels.
Hmm.
And therefore, you have to know when you're approaching them what they're feeling as far as the downs in the downside and the boredom is real,
It's very real. But I
but they
will
need it.
we do need it, but I will also reassure parents that the brain knows what to do. Um, th- there's a concept called homeostasis where the brain wants to
Mm-hmm.
be level. So even though it might feel painful, if you just wait it out a bit, it will naturally go back to that personal baseline that's going to be healthy for them, right? Not too high, not too low. So it will happen, right? I mean, putting aside cases of, real dependency, right? Which is separate from this conversation. We're talking about like run of
Correct.
the mill, day to day, hey, I'm bored or I'm sad or whatever it is. So,
Yes.
okay. So let's talk about a little more about adolescence. So, are boundaries surrounding screen time important for adolescents and why? Loaded question.
Oh boy. Um, I try to start way before adolescence. There's so much combustibility around adolescence that I love anything that I get to work with my client to set in advance.
Hmm.
So that's just one thing they don't need to deal with. There's going to be a plethora of other things they need to deal with, but hopefully. So one of the things is boundaries. I guess a lot of it does for me comes back to sleep. I am so
Yeah.
huge on sleep and protecting the
Hmm.
child's sleep for brain, for rejuvenation, for their temperament and well being. So, my boundaries that I lean into very heavily and from very early on is about screens outside of bedrooms, charging outside of bedrooms, and off times, which are usually I structure around sleep.
Hmm.
I work backwards from when the amount of hours I want them to have sleep, and I work backwards from that to when they can actually get off the electronics in order to allow their brain the time it needs to shut down.
Hmm.
And those boundaries are non-negotiable. Some
Hmm.
boundaries I think can be negotiable, and it's actually as the child grows up, it's a beautiful dialogue to have to try to find and understand things that work for the entire family. But for me, sleep boundaries around screens are non-negotiable.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. There's a sleep epidemic right now with middle and high school kids. And, I don't ever blame screens for everything. It's definitely not all the story, but it's definitely, there's connections that it's a big part of the story for sure. So, and people are always surprised when I say this in the parent eds, but it is supposed to be 2 hours before bedtime.
Hmm.
It's hard to do, right? I mean, even as an adult, sometimes I find myself, oh, let me just do this one last thing. But it
One more
really does
episode.
one more thing, but it really does make a big difference. And absolutely, every expert I talk to, the low hanging fruit is the bedrooms. Not only does it interfere with sleep, but for those that are worried about safety as well, I mean, those are the vulnerable moments, right? Wherein, they're not on their phone or device or whatever. Publicly, they know other people are sleeping, right? Like those are the moments where kids can actually get in trouble online as well, or, you know, um, have those predatory situations that you hear about. Those often take place when the kid's feeling vulnerable in those cases. So there's so many benefits to getting them out of the bedroom,
Out of the
in addition to
bedroom.
sleep as well. So okay,
Agreed.
so let's talk about social exclusion because this is huge. And I think I'm not the only one that said this, but I think it's a big reason why families move forward with the introduction of tech, most often the smartphone, right? Because of this idea of social exclusion. So, how can parents manage social exclusion involved in smartphone and social
Mm.
media use? Those are the most common places by kids and teens. How can parents manage this?
It's actually it's a very painful topic for a lot of the parents.
Yeah.
I have clients that hold on as long as they can to keep the kids away from it for as long as they can. But I do work with them understanding the cost of it. The children are excluded of certain things. They
Yeah.
are not invited to certain things. Um, and it hurts. It hurts as a parent to see your child very frustrated with it, and you're the one holding away the screen from them being able to access all these social dynamics that are occurring. The,
Hmm.
the struggle is real. At the same time, it also opens up that low of the social disparity and exclusion is that this youth is experiencing on such a deeper level is so true because for us growing up being excluded from something, we usually would find it out on Monday at school or
Exactly.
through other friends. It's a very different situation when for the ones that do have the electronic and they're
Yeah.
watching it in real life happening. They
Yes.
see the dots and their friends and they see where they all are. Everybody's posting something and they're in constant lookout for their phone to ding, so they're invited to join and it's not coming.
Yep.
That anxiety, that exclusion, those feelings are real. And I think what I work with my clients and what I want all adults to do is just to be very sensitive and aware of it, not necessarily hurry to fix it. A lot of what the teens and adolescents, what they need right now is just compassion and just understanding.
Hmm.
It's real. Don't try to minimize it. Be there with them.
Hmm.
Understand that that is a yucky feeling and we're here and we will get through it. I think adults usually fall into either fix it or minimize it. And it
Hmm.
comes from a very good place, but neither one is actually helpful
Yeah.
for the generation.
I'm so glad you brought up like the idea of social exclusion even after they get the phone or the social media, right? Because usually this is a
Mm-hmm.
topic we're talking about in the context of, well, I don't want to give that video game, I don't want to give the phone, and my kid's feeling really left out. But I mean, wouldn't you say, I don't want to put you on the spot, but wouldn't you say this social exclusion that happens after the live social exclusion might in a way be worse for the child than not having it all, right? Because there's no respite from it, like you described. They're having to live it in real time, where if they didn't have it, they never have seen any of that. What do you think about that?
It's true. And I don't, it depends on the personality of the child, of
Yeah.
course, and the personality of the parent that's helping them through it.
Hmm.
But it is yeah, I would say both are very, very difficult.
Hmm.
Also, when unfortunately there is any kind of unkindness or bullying,
Yeah.
when the kid does have the electronic, it is something that they can revisit. It is in writing, it is there. They
Yeah,
get to see it again and again. So even to get to the to leaving it behind and processing and moving on is a completely different rhythm than when we were doing it as
yeah,
kids and we just had to reframe what was said to us or forget what was said to us or shake it off. When it's in writing and it is there and other people have chimed in, it is a very different process.
yeah.
So,
I mean, I think that's the reason why I push on that a little bit as
mhm,
maybe even being more challenging is because there's no respite, right? When we were growing up, there might have been a bullying thing or an embarrassing thing or something. I mean, these things have been happening forever, right?
yes,
You could go home, you could be away with it from it, you could process it, right? And now it's just like a 24/7 dilemma. Um,
correct.
so that is really, I can't imagine being a kid and having to manage all this. It's just so challenging. So
It's
to me,
it's
yeah,
tough. And there
yeah.
is a mental health crisis with teens, and it is something that I work with a lot of the parents that either I work with in groups or separately. That is something that I treat with a lot of respect and sensitivity, and I invite them as well. We do. We have a habit of minimizing things, of
Hmm.
thinking kids can just shrug things off, toughen up. Um, what doesn't kill you make you stronger.
Hmm.
But I think that their experience of all the things that we used to experience is in a completely different level.
I use the word supercharge a lot. It's like
Mm,
we've always had these things. We've had social comparison, we've had FOMO, we've had social exclusion. It's just like a normal part of human development. But now
yeah,
everything is just supercharged, you know, and that's to me the simplest way of looking at it. These are not new problems, but they're being amplified by these systems. So, um,
agreed.
yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. So, my last question has to do with I know you deal with a lot of co parenting issues,
Hmm.
either in separate households or parents within the same household that might have different ideas about things, right? So, in
Hmm.
dealing with these co parenting issues, how do differences in philosophy between each parent regarding technology use, enter into the equation?
It's funny. Second to the number one topic of most of my work with all of my clients, which is the screens and the conflicts around that, would be
Yeah.
the co-parenting with
Hmm.
different parenting styles and the conflicts around that.
Yep.
And that's the thing about co-parenting that, like you mentioned, it is not necessarily a two separate household thing. It is also with the families that are happily ever after under the same roof, but are coming from very different relationship and triggers that have to do with screens and electronics. It's almost, this particular one is almost easier with the two separate households
Yeah.
because you have to honor however the other person is running the household and what the rules and regulations are. But when
Hmm.
you're trying to put it under the same household and people are getting triggered with each other based on the decisions and the boundaries that they put around the electronic for themselves and for the child, this is where it actually becomes a lot stickier and a lot more work. I
Hmm.
try with my clients as often as possible to set up some major boundaries that are umbrella, that are all encompassing. And like I've mentioned before, I usually bring it to sleep and I bring it to brain
Yep.
development and just the most important things. And food, same thing. I like removing the possibility of screen while children are eating. I like for
Hmm.
them to be very aware and present and in touch with their body and their appetite while they're eating. And
Yeah.
that tends to fly out the door when they're staring at a screen,
Yep.
which ends up having then issues with food and food intake and weight and other
Yeah.
issues later on. But so I would say sleep and food are things that I try to create an umbrella boundary. And then I would usually try to have them bringing in as a discussion their thoughts behind what bothers them and try to have like this is a nice situation where they can bring in a compromise where people
Hmm.
learn a little bit about give and take and understanding why there's a give and a take around that because of personal triggers, because of how people were raised in a prior generation. But yes, it is definitely a trickier topic in the same household versus two separate ones.
Yeah, but I agree. I mean, I think if you bring it maybe down to just some basics that everybody
Mm-hmm.
can agree on, just really simple things, that's a really,
Mm-hmm.
really great start.
Yes.
I have had, this is one of the biggest things that comes up in the parent eds where there's a difference between a two parent household, right? Like for example, I had a mom say, well, I really want the boundary of no phone use at all. I think she had teenagers around dinner, but my husband pulls it out, and looks at his
Mm.
emails and does all the stuff. Like, what am I going to do? Like, I can't fight with him. And let me know what you think of this advice. But in those situations, for like those little moments, maybe even
Yeah.
just narrating it, right? Like, oh, dad's going to just check this work thing, then he's going to put it away, right? Like, could be helpful in those smaller
Absolutely.
situations, right?
Absolutely. If that is something that is going to be occurring and it is in a message that goes against the message you've already communicated,
Yeah.
don't just let it be, narrate around it, because otherwise you're creating a gray area and you're
Yeah.
sending a mixed signal,
Right.
which is definitely, like you said earlier in our conversation, your children may not call you on it and they'll just observe it, but as they grow up, they will absolutely call you out on it. And then it
Yeah.
is very difficult if you haven't actually lived what you've been preaching.
Yeah.
It is a very difficult thing to work through with an adolescent or a teen.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things, again, that I hear over and over when it comes to like a family media plan or screen plan or whatever you want to call it is everyone does need to be on board, which makes it extra tricky, right? If you have that, it's usually the parent, one of the parents that is sort of, cheating or whatever. But the nice thing about narrating it, not only does it send the message to the kids, but it might even send the message to the problematic adult, right? To kind of be more self aware. Because I think a lot of people aren't self aware. They're just doing it and not even thinking about the fact that this is interfering with dinner, right? So,
Completely. And the problem is that often, and that is another thing that create a disconnect, is that we will do it as adults. We will demand something differently from our teen,
yeah,
and then we still kind of fall back on, but I'm the adult.
right.
And yes, there is a space for that at certain times, but as your child is growing up, that becomes um, a harder thing to form a connection with your teen around if that is your final statement after you have broken a rule that you've tried to set for them.
Yeah,
So being aware of it, and like you said, being self-aware that you're setting yourself up to have that sort of dialogue, just be ready for it.
yeah,
Don't be surprised when that does come up for you later on.
yeah, for sure. Well, I thank you so much for your time. I so appreciate your insights. Thank you for getting out there on the ground and kind of helping parents navigate this because it is the most challenging issue of our time. And so thank you for your work and your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I love talking to you every time.
Thanks.